Is our relationship with Hashem built through the Torah, or does it run even deeper than that? It depends on which perspective you're looking from, and we'll see two perspectives, all about the construction of the Aron, the opinions of the Ramban and Rashi, which give us two different insights into the position of Torah and our relationship with Hashem. It starts with Pirush HaPasuk, with the commentary on the Pasuk, which says, "V'nasata sakaporos al ha'aron," that you have to put the kaporos, the cover, on top of the Aron milmaila, above. And then, listen, chronologically it sounds a bit strange. And then into the Aron you put the testimony, the evidence that I've given you, which is the luchos, into the Aron. So Nechelku, Rashi, Ramban. Rashi and the Ramban debate as to what exactly this means. Rashi says, the reason the Torah is now repeating an instruction it already gave us before. Now it's telling us to put the luchos into the Aron. Even though there was already a pasuk beforehand that said you'll put the luchos into the Aron. Says Rashi, the reason is that the Torah is teaching us over here that when it's still an Aron, meaning without a lid, the Torah wants you to know that you put the luchos inside the Aron when it's just an Aron without a kaporos, and then afterwards you put the kaporos on top. The Ramban quotes Rashi and then asks, if this was an instruction that now it's telling us how to put it all together, first put in the luchos, then put on the lid, then actually it sounds like the pasuk saying, after you put on the kaporos cover, then you have to put the luchos inside. Why does the Ramban have this question on Rashi? Because the Ramban takes it as obvious that the Aron is called the Aron when it has the kaporos cover on top of it. And even though this version says the word gam, that's why it's in brackets, because the other version says rak, only when it has the kaporos on top. That is when it is considered an Aron. In other words, kloimar, Rashi is arguing that the Aron, even without a kaporos on top of it, is already designated as and called an Aron. Therefore, if the Torah tells us that you should put the luchos into the Aron, that implies that in order to fulfill that mitzvah, you have to put the luchos in before there is a kaporos on top, because the Aron is an Aron without a lid. The Ramban sees it completely differently. That it's not called the Aron until the kaporos cover is on top of it. So therefore, it wouldn't make sense, says the Ramban, that this pasuk would actually be an instruction, because that instruction would seem to go against the way that it's actually supposed to be done. Because that wouldn't be practical to say put the luchos in after you've already put the cover on. Therefore, the Ramban says the original one was the instruction. This is not an instruction, and the reason is because if we're talking about an Aron, it has to already have a kaporos on it. This is not just simply a difference of opinion about what is defined as Aron. This actually has halachic implications. We'll first look at one halachic implication, and then we'll look at two others. The Ramban is coming from the perspective that the kaporos is a part of the Aron, not separate from the Aron. Therefore, only when the kaporos is sitting on top of the Aron, then you have an Aron which is a complete Aron which can serve its purpose. And this would be no different to the design of the Aron itself, that it's made out of 3 boxes, 2 golden and 1 wooden box. But until all 3 boxes are there, everybody, including Rashi, would agree it's not an Aron, until all 3 pieces are there. Says the Ramban, so there's a 4th piece, which is the kaporos lid on top. The Ramban is arguing that cover on top of the Aron is part of the Aron, not an accessory to the Aron. Whereas Rashi is saying, no, there's one keli called the Aron, there's another keli called the kaporos. And practically, that kaporos belongs on top of the Aron. As far as and as mentioned, that's going to have an halachic implication, as the Rogatchover writes. The Gemara in Sukkah tells us that the kaporos is considered a keli. In other words, it's part of the kli shores, which means it is something that is involved in the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. And therefore the Gemara there says, and don in kli, mercha kli. You can't compare the zer, which is the decorative crown, so to speak, around the top of the Aron. You can't compare or learn halachic concepts from that zer to how the kaporos has to be designed, because the one is a decoration and one is an actual keli. The zer is just a decoration, and the kaporos is a keli. And likewise, it says in the Medrash Teras Kahanim, if you should name a kaporos, yochel yehi kis the aron Talmud loim a kaporos, you think that it's a cover to the aron. So therefore, it says it's a kaporos, means kaporos le aron, ve'in kisei le aron. It's not a cover of the aron; it's a kaporos which is placed above the aron. In other words, what it's telling us is that the purpose of the kaporos was not simply that there should be a lid over the aron, but it has its own independent value. And it just happens to be that you place that item, which is a keli in its own right, on top of the aron, which is a different keli. So why is that practically, halachically relevant? So here's your first halachic implication. Says the kaporos cover on top of the aron is used in an avodah, because on Yom Kippur, one of the things the Kohen Gadol had to do is he had to sprinkle the blood of the korbanos onto the kaporos. That means that it is part of a ritual in the Beis Hamikdash, which makes it a kli shares, a serving vessel. And what's the halachic implication of that? If this is something which has to service the community, it has to be paid for from communal funds, and therefore you cannot associate the name of an individual with a kaporos as if it's his kaporos. Whereas the aron is not considered one of the vessels involved in serving a ritual in the Beis Hamikdash. And therefore the Torah could say that Betzalel made the aron, it's associated with an individual, which we don't say about the kaporos. So that's one practical halachic difference. Whether it belongs to an individual can be associated with an individual, or has to belong to the public. In a moment we're going to see two more, in a sense, more practical nafkaminas. He has another halachic difference. It's going to have two parts to it. We know that in order to prepare things for the Mishkan, you had to have the right intentions for fulfilling not only the generic Vos and Mikdash, but that this is this particular keli to serve this particular purpose. So whoever fashioned the kaporos had to have the correct intentions for what the kaporos is there for. So the way that the Ramban looks at it, the kaporos is part of the aron. So when you're making the kaporos, you actually have to have in mind you're making the aron. Or, at the very least, if you had in mind you're making the aron and you didn't think specifically about the kaporos, you'd be fine. Whereas Rashi's view would be no, when you're making the aron, that's when you have the intention that you're making an aron. And when you make the kaporos, you actually have to have intention that you're making a kaporos. Practical difference. Here's another one, base. We know that we're not allowed to design things that are to look like what was in either the actual Mishkan itself or the Beis Hamikdash or something that was in it. So you can't have, for example, the Shulchan, as the Rambam says clearly, that is the same as the Shulchan in the Beis Hamikdash. So now let's assume that this applies to the Aron as well. From the perspective of the Ramban, you'd only transgress this particular Avera if you designed an Aron with a kaporos, implying with Kruvim, we'll get to the Kruvim later. Then you transgress the prohibition against making something which is modeled after a keli in the Beis Hamikdash, or in the Mishkan in this case. But if you go with Rashi's view, which is the kaporos is a standalone item in the Mishkan, then you could transgress if you make an aron without a top, or if you made a kaporos without an aron. So there are practical differences between Rashi and the Ramban, and we have to ask ourselves, why do they have such a different view about these two things, the kaporos and the aron? What sits at the core of their debate is how each of them views and understands what the aron is and what purpose it serves. The Ramban tells us famously, and we also know that this is an area of disagreement between the Ramban and the Rambam, but we're not getting into that now. So the Ramban teaches us the ideal purpose, the whole reason there's a Mishkan is to have an environment within which the divine presence can rest. And that happens, Shuha Aron. That is around the epicenter of the Mishkan, which is the Aron. And how does he know that? Because the Pasuk says, the Bishra says, I'm going to engage you in that place. And I will address you from on top and in fact through the kaporos. And that is the reason why the Aron is the first of all the kelim which is described after the general instruction to make a Mishkan, because this is the epicenter, this is what the Mishkan is all about. And later the Beis HaMikdash. What's the mechanism that allows this to happen? So what you've got to do then is, in order to facilitate this oracle, you've got to put the luchos inside the Aron, put the kaporos on top. Now you have the whole unit, and that allows the Shekhinah to be manifest, and the Eibusher to speak to Moshe Rabbeinu, and through that to the Jewish people. And the Ramban says this with regards to this mitzvah of making the Aron. He says, what was the purpose of making the Aron and the kaporos? Is lasum sham ha'edus, in order to put in the luchos, timna mitzvah b'fnei. That's a single mitzvah. So all three components: Aron, luchos inside, kaporos. That is a single mitzvah. V'hainu. In other words, the Ramban's perspective is not only is the Aron the container for the luchos, but in order to house the luchos ha'edus properly, you also have to have the cover with the kruvim on top, because they are like the so-called garment or protector of the luchos. And then when you have it all together, you got the container with the luchos inside, and you have the cover on top. Now you've housed the luchos properly. Now you are in an environment where the Eibusher can communicate. Rashi's perspective is completely different. As far as Rashi is concerned, the goal and purpose of the Aron and the goal and purpose of the kaporos are two different things. Why do you have the Aron? That's in order to have the luchos, which are evidence that the Eibusher is with us. That's why, after the Torah tells us about making the Aron, before it tells us about how to make the kaporos, that's when the Torah tells us, now that you have the Aron, put the luchos inside it. In other words, the purpose of the Aron is house the Torah. That's what it's there for. Like Rashi extracts from that word, right? It says, what's the edus, says Rashi? HaTorah. That refers to the Torah, which is the testament between me and you, says Hashem, that I'm the one who instructed you to follow those mitzvahs that are written in the Torah. Now, in addition to the Aron, which is there to house the Torah, there's something independent which goes into the same space on top of the Aron. That's called the kaporos, and that is that's for communication from the Eibusher. The purpose of that communication is to be able to instruct the Jewish people how they should behave. Even beyond that, the Pirush Rashi ala pasuk. The way Rashi interprets the pasuk, he doesn't mention the fact that this is where the Shekhinah will reside. Rather, what it is when I schedule a time, says the Eibusher, to communicate with you, then that's the place that I will make as the meeting place. Therefore, Rashi holds the kaporos is a separate keli with a separate purpose. And not a part of the Aron. So we've seen that Rashi and the Ramban are not just simply debating about the practicalities of what is in the name Aron, but rather a totally different view of what the purpose of this particular keli or kelim would be. Now, once we see this distinction between Rashi and the Ramban's perspective on the kaporos, whether it is part of the Aron or its own entity, is also going to inform how they view the purpose and role and design of the kruvim which sit on top of the Aron. Because there too you could have two versions or two opinions. Aleph, you could say you could say the kruvim are a design feature of the kaporos. So there's an entity called the kaporos, and the way you design it, it has kruvim. So what you've got to do is from the two ends, you've got to hammer out the images of these kruvim, and that is what makes the kaporos. Or base, kruvim einam rak prat b'kaporos. It's not just that the kruvim are part of the detail of the kaporos. Shehi kaporos chelek me'aron le'edus, and the kaporos is part of the Aron, which is there to service the luchos. El kruvim gufei moed chelek shel Aron, but the kruvim also have their own role to play. Kashem shakaporos chelek me'menu. So again, let's go back. The one way that you could say it is that the kruvim are part of the design of the kaporos, or you could say the kaporos is really part of the aron, so therefore the kruvim are really just an additional part of the aron. So the Rashi, this kaporos idavam nifred meha aron kanal. If you take Rashi's view, which is the kaporos and the aron are two distinct entities, then gama kruvim and prat be aron kemuvan. Then it goes without saying that obviously if the kruvim are on the or beaten out of the gold of the kaporos, and the kaporos is separate from the aron, then the kruvim are not part of the aron. In fact, if you read the psukim at the most obvious level, it implies that it seems very clear that the kruvim are designed as part of the kaporos, which Rashi is saying is separate to the aron. That's why number one, that's why the physical design of the kruvim is that they're fashioned out of the kaporos itself. And Beis, and the whole design had to be that they spread their wings over the kaporos and they had to face, so to speak, towards the kaporos. In other words, as Rashi points out, the entity, the item that is going to allow divine communication is the kaporos. And then practically, but the actual broadcast of the sound will come from between the kruvim, which are a part of the kaporos, which is separate from the aron. The Ramban has a completely different perspective of the kruvim. He says, those images which are going to be on the kruvim, they are effectively an echo or reflection of the Merkava, the divine chariot that Yecheskel saw. And those entities, or that vision that Yecheskel saw in the Merkava, that is a form of kruvim. That's why we describe the Eibishter as Yoshev HaKruvim. He sits on or amongst the kruvim, like in the chariot. That's why they spread their wings, as if to imply that they are this chariot carrying the divine presence. Because remember, the Ramban is saying that the purpose of this element of the Mishkan is to bring down the divine presence. And that's why if you actually think about it, it makes sense that they should spread their wings upwards. They are like this divine throne that shelters or covers the Torah of the Eibishter, which is the luchos inside the aron. That's why the Ramban explains the pasuk repeating itself, where it says, "V'noi adati, I'll engage you there. And I will speak to you from between the two kruvim, which are on the kaporos, which is on the aron. So the Ramban asks, why are you telling me where the kruvim are? You've already told me where they are. When it comes the time to speak, you have to say, I'm speaking from the kruvim, which are on top of the kaporos, which is on top of the aron. Well, the Ramban argues that's because the Torah here is looking to define for us what the kruvim are all about. Because the Eibishter instructed that the design of the kruvim has to be with these extended upwards wings. And the Torah does not tell us why they are kruvim, or what their role is in the Mishkan, and why they should be designed in this particular way. Therefore, the Ramban says now the Torah is going to clarify. What's the purpose of the kruvim? That you should take the kaporos with its kruvim on top of it, which is all one entity at the top of the aron. Because inside the aron you're going to put the luchos, which are this testament to the Eibishter instructing us about mitzvahs. That's what you're going to put inside the aron. And that will then, that aron with the luchos, with this kaporos, with the kruvim, will form the so-called throne, where I'm going to engage with you. And again, the Ramban telling us that this element is there to achieve the purpose of the Mishkan, which is the divine revelation in the Mishkan. This is where it's going to happen. But and therefore I'll speak to you from on top of the kaporos, through or via the two kruvim. Why is that the place? Because that is on top of or part of the aron. Therefore, the Ramban's perspective is the kruvim are part of the aron, as the kaporos, in his view, is part of the aron. Therefore, the Ramban is saying there are three elements that come together to create a single element, which is the place of divine presence. What is that? Aron kaporos kruvim. And in fact, the Eibush is called the one who sits. Sit implies coming down to our reality in the context of Kruvim, which is part of or design element of the Aron. Which spills over directly into why the Rashi, which is the opinion we know, and the Ramban have completely different ideas about what the Kruvim looked like. The Ramban says that the Kruvim had to be similar to the vision that Yecheskel had. Yoshev HaKruvim, of the Eibishter, so to speak, manifesting within the environment of Kruvim. Whereas Rashi's opinion, which is much more familiar to us, is that the Kruvim had the faces of children. So the Ramban says the whole purpose of the Kruvim, which is part of the Kaporos, which is part of the Aron, is all about being able to manifest the divine presence in the space. So therefore, what should Kruvim look like? They should look like the Yecheskel vision of the Eibishter's manifestation. Whereas Rashi is coming from a totally different perspective. That the Kaporos and Kruvim are not part of the bigger picture of the Aron and the Luchos inside the Aron, but are their own standalone independent entities. That's why the faces of the Kruvim are children. Because the purpose then of the Kruvim is not to say this is what manifests the Shekhinah, but rather to say this is how much the Eibishter loves us. Or like the Pasuk says, that the Eibishter says we're like a child who he loves. Parts of Tinok, the face of a child, the face of a young child specifically. We know that the love for a younger child is always greater. In other words, if you had to distill the two views of the Ramban and Rashi, it boils down to this. The Aron, which contains the Luchos, is the symbol of Torah. Whereas the Kruvim and Kaporos, which is all about communicating to the Yidden, that is to highlight how much the Eibusha cherishes us. So the Rashi is making that distinction. There's Torah and there's Eibish's love for us. That's why the Kruvim look like little children. And this aligns with the opinion of the perspective given by Rabbeinu Bechaya about the Kruvim. Where those who are familiar with Rabbeinu Bechaya, he often goes through Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Soy on a particular piece of Torah. So here he says, according to the Pshat perspective, in addition to the fact that the Kruvim had faces of children, was specifically male and female. That was to illustrate that the incredible love that the Eibishter has, the amount that he cherishes us, is like a man and a woman, a male and a female. As the Gemara Yuma tells us, when the Yidden used to come to the Beis Hamikdash on the Shalosh Regalim, the Kohanim would pull back the paroiches, and they'd allow people to see the Kruvim. And how would they see the Kruvim? That they were in an embrace. And they would say, how cherished are you to the Eibishter? Look, this is the symbol of how beloved you are to the Eibishter. And that's what the Rabbeinu Bechai is telling us is the purpose of this whole piece of the Kruvim, is to show how incredibly beloved we are to the Eibishter without anything to facilitate that love. And that's going to be really the deeper difference that we have between the approach of the Ramban and Rashi. As we'll see from a deeper perspective. As we've already mentioned, the Aron, including the Luchos, that's obviously the symbol of Torah. The Ramban says everybody had to participate in contributing to the Aron so that everybody would be able to share the merit of learning Torah. So therefore, if the Aron represents Torah, then the Ramban, who says that the Aron, Kaporos, and Kruvim are all one entity, he's telling us that the Kruvim, which sit on the Kaporos, are all part of the same singular theme, which is Aron. Therefore, the message that the Eibishter will communicate to us via the Kruvim on the Kaporos, that's because this is the place of Torah. So Torah is what facilitates the Eibishter speaking to us. Mashenkin the Rashi takes a different view. He says, the two subjects over here. HaTorah, which is represented by the ark, Ve'Yisrael, which are represented by the Kruvim. And the reason they arrive at these two different conclusions is because of the different style of what they're doing in their Pirushim. But Pirush HaRamban, yes, of course, the Ramban is technically a Pashton explaining the simple explanation of the Psukim. However, he includes things that are a little bit more elaborate and things that are even a little bit more mystical. One of the things that the Ramban does is includes into his commentary secrets of Torah, which means the Ramban is focused on those experiences of Torah which are going to inspire us, exposing, revealing godliness, revealing aspects of Kedusha, so that we could have the satisfaction and the pleasure of understanding and appreciating these deep, rich things. When you're looking from the perspective of Giloim, things which we can understand, which we can describe, which can be revealed, in that reality, the link between Jews and Hashem is via Torah. Whereas if you're looking from Rashi's perspective, which is Pshuto Yishon Mikra, the simplest understanding of the Pasuk, if you're looking from the simplest perspective, Morgeshes Pashtus Shel Yehudi, you're going to notice the simplest aspect of what it is to be Jewish. In other words, Varia Pashtus Shel Yehudi Davar Echad in Pshitas Atzmas, as the Frierdiker Rebbe famously says, that the Pshitas, the simplicity of a simple Jew, and possibly even the simplicity of a Jew, even who is not so simple, but has obviously this deep simplicity within them, that links directly to the simplicity of the Eibishter's essence. When you're talking about the essence, then you're talking about a connection between Hashem and the Yidden that doesn't depend on the Torah, meaning that connection is absolute, is always there, even for the Jew who has not yet engaged in Torah. And that's why we say there are three knots that are bound with each other: Torah, Yidden, and Hashem. Yidden, Torah, and Hashem. Now, if there are three elements, there are only two knots, surely, right? The knot that links this one to this one, and the knot that links this one to this one. So why do we say Tlas Kashrin? Why do we say there are three knots? That's because there's another knot that links the Eibishter on that side to the Yidden on this side. So we normally say Yisrael, Oraisa, Kutchabrichu, but there's another connection which is Yisrael, Kutchabrichu, Araisa, or Kutchabrichu, Yisrael, Araisa, right? Which is a direct connection between the Eibishter and us that is not contingent on Torah. Therefore, Rashi's perspective, coming from the perspective of Pshat, which dials right into the essence, the Kaporos and Kruvim have their own value independent of the Aron. The Kaporos, which has on it the Kruvim, which represent our beloved relationship with Hashem, that speaks to the essence of our connection to Hashem, that is direct and at our essence. This is a relationship which is beyond Torah. As the expression of our sages, that the very first initiating thought that the Eibishter had was hidden, even before there's a thought for Torah. And that also explains most parts of Tinoik Dafka on a spiritual level, how come the faces of the Kruvim were specifically children. Because the love that a parent has for a child is not because the child has certain qualities or talents, but it's because they are one and the same. They are a single entity. They share the same DNA, and that is available even when the child is a baby and hasn't yet shown what kind of talents and value they bring to the world. And the place where it's most apparent that the love is so deep is when the child is still an undeveloped, immature baby. Likewise, this incredible, intense core love that the Eibishter has for us is not something which is dependent on how much Torah we've learned, how many mitzvahs we've done. It's because we're part of the Eibishter. So therefore, if you're going to illustrate this core love that the Eibishter has for us, you're going to illustrate it with the face of a baby. And that's And now that we understand that the Ramban is saying our greatness comes through Torah, because that's how things appear in the world of Giluyim. And Rashi is telling us that our greatness is absolute. It doesn't matter what's going on, because he's looking from the perspective of Etzem. Now we can understand how the Ramban and the Rashi each explain why the Kaparis is on top of the Aron. The Ramban says this is all part of the Aron. Why is there Kaparis? Why are they Kruvim? It's part of the Aron. It's for the purpose of the Aron. It's in order to manifest the Shekhinah in this world. The That's what the Ramban says. When the Eibush is going to speak to us, it emphasizes he's going to speak from where the kapara is, which is on the Aron. Because how is the Eibush speaking? What's the connection point? Torah. But the reason, according to Rashi, why the kapara sits above the Aron is because it needs to illustrate to us that the kaparas and what it represents, this unique connection between us and Hashem, is higher than the connection via Torah, higher than the Torah itself. And therefore the kaparas, or the kruvim, is the protection for the Aron, not the other way around. Because practically that is exactly what the kaparas is. It's the cover on top, which means it protects the Torah. Because when you're talking to the essence of our relationship with Hashem, we're the ones who add value to the Torah. As the Zohar says, we actually bring out depth and perspective and detail within Torah that isn't, so to speak, naturally visible. And that links to also the fact that the word kaparas is a word which is associated with the word kapara, atonement. Because how is it possible to atone for Averas? It's because our neshama is connected to Hashem at its essence beyond the Torah. The Torah says you broke me. The Torah says you went against me. So how can you reconcile with Eibishter? We have to dig deeper than the Torah, rise higher than the Torah. Find the essence of our connection to the Eibishter. The kaparas, that brings the kapara. That's why it's possible that you could have a Jew who lacked in terms of their observance of Torah. In other words, they damaged the level of relationship between themselves and Hashem, which is built on Torah. And nevertheless, you could fill the void, and you could deserve atonement. Not only do you fix what was and fill in the gaps, but you actually rise higher. As we know, Baalei Tshuva extend to a level which is way beyond the level of a tzaddik, until we achieve the greatest meaning of the word kapara, which is not just to atone, to erase, to clear up the mess, but to become a cause, a source of tremendous nachas to the Eibishter, which every one of us is capable of doing. And when we recognize that we have this deep relationship with Hashem, and even our lack of observance and commitment to Torah cannot wreck that relationship, that should inspire us, obviously, to build that relationship, to improve that relationship, to fill in the gaps, and that way to allow the Eibishter to fill in the gaps that we have felt over the course of history through Golus, and to bring us Moshiach now.